Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 17, Section 1, talking about the age of exploration and European exploration and expansion. And to start with, I want to talk about a couple terms, because these are going to be some things that are going to come back and haunt us as we kind of go through this unit and as we enter into the next few units talking about Africa and Asia and such. So I want to talk about what an empire is. And using the Google definition, an empire is an extensive group of states, countries under a single supreme authority, formerly and especially under that of an emperor or empress. Okay, a lot of words. Your textbook basically says that this is a large political unit or state, usually under a single leader that controls many peoples and territories. So you can think about empires as maybe something from the movies or such, but in the context that we're going to be talking about as we kind of go into the next few units is talking about it in terms of European powers over other groups of people. So we could be looking at what will politically become the United Kingdom or Great Britain and the colonies that they tried to establish as a king or a queen over different groups of people. You can look at it in terms of like the French under an emperor like Napoleon and its authority that it might have over other groups of people. Okay, the concept of imperialism, according to Google, is the policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy, which is like negotiations, or military force. Okay, your textbook basically says an extension of a nation's power over other lands. So, in this concept that we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about the desire of European countries or powers to establish empires outside of Europe, looking at lands in the Americas, in Asia, in Africa, wherever they can, establish kind of a stronghold of power. And a lot of it is because they're looking for resources. This could be in terms of mineral resources, or it could be in the resources of humankind. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Spanish Empire. And this kind of goes back to kind of the time of shortly after Columbus had sailed to what would be the Americas. But in 1494, a treaty known as the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed between Portugal and Spain. And this was because of a kind of an argument that was happening between these two groups of people over who was going to have the power to establish colonies in the New World. And this treaty kind of becomes known as this line of demarcation because these two powers went to the Pope, and at this time it was Pope Julius II. And what he did is he basically drew a line in basically what is a line of longitude. And anything that was east of that line would be in the hands of the Portuguese, and anything west of it would be in the hands of the Spaniards. Granted, uh, Pope Julius probably didn't realize all the lands that were out there in the Americas. And if you look at the map below here, where we have basically the items that are in blue representing Portugal and anything that's in red representing Spain, kind of looks like Spain gets the better deal out of all of this. So anyway, by the early 1600s, Spain had controlled basically of regions and three regions in North America, South America, the West Indies. And so it is a considerable chunk of land, whereas Portugal had control, at least in the Western Hemisphere, of what would become like modern day Brazil. But if you look at the map here, there's a little bit of the coastal regions of Africa, a little bit of the coastal regions of India, and if you go into like Indonesia, some of the different islands there. So anyway, When we talk about European imperial powers in the Western Hemisphere, I want to break it down by some of the big players: Spain, Portugal, France, the Netherlands, and England. Granted, you're not going to be writing these down, but just to kind of give you an idea of maybe what they had. As far as Spain, they had control of Mexico and South America and a little bit of the American Southwest. And the big way that they were able to acquire this land was basically by conquest. The relationships were very difficult, kind of harmful, because um, Spain was using conquistadors, which were basically conquerors that came in and used military force to take over certain groups of people. And we're going to hear more about that as we get into talking about what happened in places like Mexico. The Portuguese, the big location in the Western Hemisphere is Brazil. The big activities that they were doing were farming. And as far as the use and relationship with the peoples that were living in the Western Hemisphere, it was all about the use of labor. Uh, in Brazil, or what would become Brazil, originally you saw the use of native peoples as labor, but because of the introduction of smallpox, eventually Brazil is going to, or the Portuguese are going to be importing slaves from West Africa into parts of Brazil and to use them as labor within agriculture. France, as far as their locality, North America primarily, what would be parts of the United States, eventually Canada. And the big activities were basically fishing and farming. And as far as like their relationship, they were always making alliances. They were trying to ally with those people that were living there. Netherlands, again, North America. Trade was a big activity here because there were certain items that maybe the native peoples had that the people of the Netherlands wanted. The big way that the Dutch, which are the people from the Netherlands, were able to acquire things was through the purchase of land. And so they were actually buying things from the native peoples. Eventually, England, again, North America, farming, the search of gold and silver. As far as relationships, basically giving aid, but for the most part, there was a series of contracts. At some point in time, there's going to be distrust between the native peoples and those of the English. So, when we talk about conquistadors, Hernan Cortez and Francisco Pizarro, these two men led invasions into the territories of what two native peoples? Well, Hernan Cortez was famous for his conquest over the Aztec in Mexico. And when we talk about Pizarro, it's his conquest over the Incas in Peru that gives them their notoriety. Some of the wealth resources that Spain was looking for in the Americas was primarily the use of sugar, gold, and eventually silver. All of these become very valuable to the Spaniards. Thank you very much.